Hey, thank you to everybody for joining again. Um, we are in middle of our series of shiurim on tefillah, and our shiurim on tefillah have taken the path of the siddur. This is fundamentally a class on Jewish liturgy, and when we go through the siddur, we find that we learn lessons every page that we turn, and we've turned a few pages. We've begun with the Elokai Neshama, the Netilas Yadayim, the Ashiyatzar. And we're starting to learn a couple of lessons about how the tefillahs develop and how the let me minimize my screen, right. Hold up. Pin and minimize. So we're learning a couple lessons about how tefillah develops. And tonight we're going to continue with what's called the Berachot HaPeulot, or as most people know them, the Berachot HaShachar, which begin with Hanoten Lasachvivina. Last week we left off with Elokai Neshama, and we looked at how Elokai Neshama might have begun as one of many various blessings which were intended to be said immediately upon awakening. Chazal saw it fit to write a blessing that as soon as a person awakes, he should praise Hashem for the merit and for the miracle of both sleep and the miracle of awakening. And we saw how there were possibly a few versions in the time of the Gemara, both in Bavel and in Yerushalayim, I should say northern Eretz Yisrael. And Elokai Neshama was the one that survived as the beginning of the Berachot HaShachar. That's what we saw last week, and we explored the ins and outs of that fascinating bracha. Tonight, we're going to continue past Elokai Neshama. And in most of the Sidurim, what follows is a series of brachot, which come from a Gemara in Brachot of Samach Amud Beit, which we have been looking at for the past couple of weeks. And this series of brachot is Hanoten Lasalfi V'Nalev Chim Ben Yom Uvein Laila. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Machalam Pokei Chverim. Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu Machalam Zokef Kifufim. These are brachot which are familiar to every Jew who prays every day. Very hard to forget, very easy to remember. Brachot one after the other, which we say every single day. And if you look at the screen, I'm showing a slide of Berachot HaPeulot, the blessings of morning activities. And I did not make up this term. This term is used by Reb Saadia Gaon to distinguish the brachot which we say in the morning on the brachot of things that you do, like sitting up in your bed, zokef kufufim, hearing the rooster, I should say, opening your eyes, pokeach ivrim, putting on your shoes, you would say shasali kol tzarki, etc. So Reb Saadia Gaon sees these as brachot ha'peulot, or blessings on activities, and that's the name he gives them. And this is in distinction to other brachot, like the brachot hashmiyah, a brachot for things that you hear, or brachot hari'iyah, brachot for things that you see. He puts them into neat different categories. And Rav Saadia Gaon in his Siddur, and we've discussed Rav Saadia Gaon in the past, but he is intensely creative, and he almost disregards the way the Gemara orders it in Masechet Brachot. And he takes, for example, Hanoten L'Sachvivina out of the order, and he doesn't say it in the morning. Or Saadia Gaon says, let's take Hanoten L'Sachvivina, which is the bracha you say upon hearing a rooster. Let's put it with the collection of brachot you say when you hear things. So he's intensely creative in this fashion. And Saadia Gaon believes that all of these brachot, as they come from the Gemara in brachot, all of these are occasional brachot. These are brachot which should only be said upon the occasion of hearing a rooster cry. If one would hear a rooster cry, holds Rav Saadia Gaon, a person should then say a bracha hashmiyah for hearing the rooster cry. So he puts it in a completely different category. This aligns with Rav Saadia Gaon and the Rambam's view of the idea that the brachot which we're about to enumerate here in the Gemara, all the brachot that everybody says every day, all these brachot hashachar, these are brachot which are supposed to be said upon occasioning these things. For example, if you hear the rooster, if you sit up on your bed, when you put on your belt, when you put on your hat, all of these things, when you wash your face, According to the Rambam and of Saadia Gaon, these brachot were designed to be done upon that occasion. And if you didn't do it, you wouldn't say that bracha. So the Rishonim, as a consequence of this idea that all of these things are occasional brachot, disagree fundamentally over how to treat this series of brachot that we know from our morning prayers. Do we treat this series of brachot, these brachot HaPeulot, as a brachot HaShvach, or do we treat them as a brachot HaNehenin? Meaning, are these blessings of praise to Hashem? Are we praising Hashem for the rooster? Are we praising Hashem for our ability to walk? Or are these more like thank yous or brachot hanehanin, just like you say a bracha hanehanin when you eat an apple, or you say borei priya etz, so too this should be treated halachically like brachot hanehanin. Those are the two camps that the Rishonim fall into. The Rush seems to say that they're a mix. Some are hanehanin, some are shvach, but these are generally the two camps that the Rishonim fall into when trying to describe this series of brachot in the Gemara. Now, as we saw a couple of weeks ago, the Al Natilat Yadayim aspect kind of changed the history of these series of brachot. And in the time of the Gemara, as we saw, and I'm showing the page here on my screen, in the time of the Gemara, it appears that they had no concern with the fact that a person might wake up in the morning and his hands would be dirty. From the Gemara's perspective, that's fine. A person can wake up in the morning, have his hands dirty, and still say Elokai Neshama. He could still say the brachot as soon as he occasions upon these things. However, in the time of the Geonim, we see a concern grow that perhaps people do not have clean hands in the morning, and therefore they should wash them first before saying a bracha. This created a morning liturgy, a fixed morning liturgy, because people would have to wait until, even if they did all these things, they got out of bed, they put on their hat, they put on their belt, they would have to wait until they said Al Natilat Yadayim and then say all of these brachot in a series. They would have to say, they have to say all these brachot all at once. So it's in the time of the Geonim that we find these brachot definitely become a fixed morning liturgy and part of a series. There is a pushback in the later Geonim, like in the time of Saadia, and later in the Rishonim by the Rambam and his son, there's a pushback against this practice to make them a fixed liturgy. There's a pushback to say, no, these shouldn't be in a series. These should just be on occasion. When you do them, you should do when you do these actions, then you should say the bracha. So that's the pushback that happened in the time of the Rishonim, and we've discussed this before. And that's just a little bit of a recap as to how that developed. Now, the Sfaradim, there's a gloss, like a note on the side of the Siddur of Amram Gaon. And this is not written by Amram Gaon, but one of the scribes wrote in that the minhag in Spain was that everybody would do these at shul. They would wait until they got to shul, and then they would say the brachot. From the other evidence, it seems that this was more localized than the scribe might have thought, but it's clear that many Sfaradi Kehilot had this minhag to wait until they got to shul and then to say the brachot. I'm sorry, I lost my cursor here. Where did it go? Got it. Okay. Now, the Ashkenazim retains I would say the Ashkenazim retains an even stronger minhag, because in the Ashkenazi minhag, the Chazan is supposed to get up and say all of the brachot out loud. The reason for this is because they're afraid that somebody in the community won't know how to say the brachot, and the Chazan is being motzi him. And then later, if you look in the Achronim, there's a development about whether or not somebody who is a baki can be somech on the shliach tzibur or not. So there is some development to this custom. It wasn't just a haphazard custom. They did create this custom of saying it out loud for a reason. Alrighty. So what exactly happened to the attitude of this machloket? So if you look quite a bit later from Rabbi Yaakov Mimarwas, I think that's how you pronounce his name, Rabbi Yaakov Mimarwas. He wrote a famous sefer called the Shiur Teshuvot Min Hashamayim. Shiur Teshuvot Min Hashamayim is literally a book where the Rishon, the sage, he puts a series of brachot. He puts forth a series of questions to the heavens, like by writing a special kameya, putting it under his pillow. And he asked halachic questions to the Beit Din Shel Maila, and he asked them for their opinion. So everybody has their own opinion about this sefer. Like, is it real? Is it fake? Is it his imagination? Do we paskin like what Shemayim says? But this is a real sefer, and if you want to find it, it's called Shalot Utshuvot Min HaShamayim. It's from one of the later Rishonim. And he asks the heavens, he asks the malachim basically, what happened? What's the story? Who's right in this argument? Is it true that you should only say these brachot if you chance upon them, right? Kishama kol tanagola, if you hear a rooster, or does a person say it whether or not he heard a rooster? Who's right? Which camp of Rishonim is right? So the malachim replied to him that these, like the Geonim, basically, they say all of these brachot were instituted only to fulfill the 100 brachot that we say every day. And a person can say them whether or not he heard a rooster. And the idea is basically essentially that these are birkot hashvach, but they bring something, a very interesting proof. The angels tell him that, look at Shmon Esrei. Shmon Esrei, you're allowed to say Rofei Cholim or Rifeinu Hashem Elokeinu, that Hashem should heal us, even though if you don't have a sick person in your house. So just like you could say a birkat hashvach, even just like you could say a birkat bakasha, a penitential, a petitionary prayer without having the need, just like you could say a petitionary prayer without having the need, so too can you say a praise without having the experience. This is what the angels tell Rabbi Yaakov. It's a fascinating raya, but they seem to affirm, the angels affirm for him that the whole reason for the Takana of Chazal, they only instituted these brachot in order to fulfill the quota of 100 brachot every day. And we're going to discuss a little bit more about that idea a little bit later. Okay, so now let's get down to business. Let's look at the Gemara itself. We're going to go through all the series of brachot as the Gemara enumerates them. And then we'll discuss them one by one. So I must give a disclaimer. In my earlier shiurim, if somebody goes back to like shiur, like 5 years ago in the podcast, I was a lot more, I studied it much more on a low level, not on a low level in a literal sense, but in a low level, meaning closer to the text. We did a lot of the homilies. We looked at a lot of the drushim and the pirushim from all of the mefarshim, the mekubalim and the rishonim. We did a deep dive into the text itself and how the commentators understood these brachot. I'm going to do less of that this time. We're still going to examine how the commentators understood these brachot, but we're not going to go as deep as we did last time. Last time we took a deeper dive into the Kabbalah, and if anybody's interested, please retrace my steps, go back to the earlier shiurim, and you'll hear those shiurim on the Kabbalah. Tonight, I want to focus on the way the Talmud Bavli structures this series of brachot, because so many sidurim that we have today are built on these brachot. There's 3 brachot that we're going to leave out tonight, and that is shlos ani goy, shlos ani avet, shlos ani isha. Those are not necessarily brachot HaPeulot. Some people call them the brachot HaMavchinot, right? The brachot of distinction, that I'm not a goy, that I'm not an eved, that I'm not an isha. And they are not present here in Masechet, in this page of Masechet Brachot. They warrant their own page in Menachot Daf Mem Gimel Amud Bet. So or Mem Dalet, I don't remember precisely. Those brachot we're going to discuss separately, but this series here is what we're going to focus on tonight. Now, as I've mentioned before, there's always the trickiness of, let me share a different page here with you. There's always the trickiness of using the Talmud Bavli as your source for researching the Siddur. And the reason for that is, as I've showed before, and let me see if I can get this into full screen. So I hope I'm sharing, Hachi Garcinon. If you look at, let's say, for example, bavli.geniza.org, which is a great resource for looking at all the manuscripts of Talmud Bavli, and you follow the brachot here, you'll see how many variations there are, both in the order and in the text of the brachot in the Talmud Bavli. Many of the scribes thought they were being helpful by changing the nusach that they found in the Gemara with the nusach that they knew. They were retrojecting their own siddur onto the Gemara and trying to fix the Gemara, which is a nice, thank you, but no thank you. And this is what the damage a lot of the scribes did to distort the proper transmission of the Gemara. So here, as I'm showing you on this table, we have multiple different orders, multiple different versions of both the Nusach and the order of the Talmud Bavli. That's problem number one. Problem number one, just to summarize, is to say that again, is that the Talmud Bavli itself has multiple different versions. If we look in the manuscripts of Talmud, we have multiple different versions of these brachot. That's problem number one. Problem number two is that if you look at the Rishonim and look at what kind of text they had for their Gemara, you realize that they had even more nuschaot or versions of the Bavli than we did. And 5 years ago, when I still had an amazing amount of enthusiasm, I went ahead and created a spreadsheet here of all the various Rishonim and Geonim, which of all the various Rishonim and Geonim and their list of the brachot in their halacha svarim or in their quotations of the Gemara. So this, I thought I was doing God's work. Honestly, I was very proud of myself. And then I realized that if you look in the Frankel Rambam, somebody did the same thing in the back, and I was so upset. I felt like I was the only guy. I'm the guy who did this. It was me. I made this whole chart, and I'm so special. And then I looked at the back of the Frankel Rambam, and somebody did the exact same thing. He laid out all of these versions side by side with the comparison. And as you'll notice, some of them here, like Magbiah Shvalim, Rofe Cholim, Somech Noflim, some of these are ones that you might have not heard of. This spreadsheet is only page one. This is the early ones. And then if you look, there's the medieval. We have the Tur, Shulchan Aruch, Buderham, or Hershliach Tzibur, and the Shla, sorry, late medieval. And finally, the modern Sidurim. If anybody wants, I can send them this spreadsheet. It's fun to look at. And there's a lot of data to really cross compare. And I should also mention that not all of these orders are deliberate. Depending on the Rishon writing, sometimes they were writing it deliberately in order. Sometimes they were not writing it deliberately in order because they held they were occasional. So that's just for some fun. Let's get back to the Gemara. Okay. Zak the Heilige Gemara, as we say. Says the Gemara, Kishama kol tarnegola. Right after Elokai Neshama. If a person hears the sound of a rooster, Lema Baruch Asher Natan la Sechvi Vina. A person should say, blessed is the one who gave to the heart or to the rooster wisdom. So the literal meaning of this pasuk, if you look in Iyov, is Mishat Batuchot Chochma o Minatan la Sechvi Vina, or who gave to the heart wisdom. The literal meaning of the word Sechvi is heart. And let me just show you the next page here. No, where are we? Yeah, this should be okay. Yeah, here we go. So this is a Gemara in Rosh Hashanah Daf Chavav Amud Aleph. The Gemara, in discussing the words, there's a list over there of Amoraim who saw different. There's a list of Amoraim who traveled to different places, and they heard different people calling things different things. Okay, so Amar B'Shimon ben Lakish, Kishalachti l'tchum Kan Neshraya. When I went to the district of Kan Neshraya, hayu korin lekala ninfi uletarnagol sechvi. Let me just skip a little. V'letarnagol sechvi. Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav. Why did they call a tarnagol heart? Amar Rav Yehuda Amarav. Yibayte Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Ma'ikra. What does the pasuk say? Mishat batuchot chochma. Who placed in the innards wisdom? Omi natan la sechvi vina. Mishat batuchot chochma elu klayot. Those are the kidneys. Omi natan la sechvi vina ze tarnagol. When it says sechvi vina, this also means a rooster. In other words, even though the literal meaning of the pasuk is a heart, over here it means rooster. So there's a lot of discussion in the Rishonim exactly where the word comes from and what the connotation of this word is. And I actually find this conversation very, very interesting. I actually thought we're lucky because the Yiddish word for tuchas most likely comes from tuchot. So I found it funny that we only say we don't say Baruch Asher Natan batuchot chachma, because anyone who speaks Yiddish will be giggling uncontrollably every morning. But we do say Baruch Hanoten la sechvi vina. And the sechvi part, this word sechvi, the Rishonim say comes from the word soche, which means in a way to see or to perceive. It doesn't just mean to see. It's a deeper type of seeing. Like the pasuk says, maskiot levav. And when Targum says by vayabet and a person like perceived and they saw deeply, Targum will say this the key, right? From the lashon of soche, that a person could see. We know that by Sarai Menu, she was called Yiska. Why? Because she saw with Ruach HaKodesh. The schach of a sukkah, for example, is called schach because you can see through it. Soche means that the rooster can perceive that it is daytime even though the sun hasn't come up yet. That's the connotation of the word sechvi. So it's a way of saying the heart, but also saying intuition of the heart, where a person can not see something with their eyes but still perceive it. That's the deeper understanding of sechvi, because it comes from the word of soche. Okay, so it comes from a pasuk. Many brachot come from a pasuk, and that's why we have the language as it is. Let's go further. Ki patach einei, when a person opens his eyes, lema baruch pokeach ivrim. A person should say, blessed is he who illuminates the blind. So the Rishonim here jump on this, and they say you should know Pikicha doesn't necessarily mean that a person is literally blind. We know that it says in Bereshit, v'nifkichu einechem, right? When Adam and Chava ate from the tree, their eyes, what does Targum say there? Targum says, v'tnaharin einei tarvehon, that both of their eyes were illuminated. Not that Adam and Chava didn't know that they were naked. Of course they knew that they were naked, but their eyes were illuminated. They suddenly realized that they were naked. So pokeach is the opposite, literally the opposite of soche. When a person is soche, his mind perceives something and he can understand that something's there, even though his eyes don't see it, right? So the rooster can understand that it is daytime, even though it appears night, because he understands that there's a trace of light that he could perceive. While pokeach is the exact opposite. Pokeach is where your eyes can see something plainly. They're in your plain view, but your brain doesn't see it. Your mind has no idea what it's actually seeing. Pokeach is the illumination of knowledge. And the Gra actually points out in Mishlei that pokeach is specific to non-Torah matters. When someone's a pikeach, a person is intelligent, but not in a Torah intelligence. It's a simple, more of a plain intelligence. So I happen to think that's a really interesting cross, that we go from sechvi to pokeach. Okay, let's go a little further. Ki taritz v'yativ, when a person gets up, lema baruch matir asurim. So I should point out that there was another girsa of the Gemara that also had kad magbia reshe. When a person lifts his hands, he should say, lifts his head, he should say baruch magbia shvalim. But our girsa of the Gemara is just what's the word? Ki taritz v'yativ lema. He should say baruch matir asurim. So this version, matir asurim, many of the Geonim did not have it in the Gemara, and they thought it was wrong to say it, because once you're saying Zokef Kifufim, once you're saying who straightens out the bent, why do you need to say Matir Asurim? You got up, you got up. Of course, it's redundant. So the Rav Amram Gaon says it's a bracha levatalan. A person should not say Matir Asurim. Kabbalistically, the Mikubalim dive into Matir Asurim. They believe that it's more than just like sleep paralysis. It's also like there are bonds, asurim, spiritual impure bonds, which hold a person down when he's sleeping, and those are released when a person wakes up. It's certain types of klipot. But the simple meaning is that when a person goes to sleep, his brain shuts down the muscles, it restricts them so he can't move, and then matir asurim, a person is the muscles are allowed to be released, and Hashem gives you control of your muscles again. If anybody's ever experienced sleep paralysis, it's when you wake up in like a specific stage of REM sleep and you don't have control over your muscles, but your mind is still awake and your brain still has your muscles shut down. It's kind of terrifying because you can't move, but you're locked in a position and you're awake. Terrifying thing, but that's why we say Baruch Matir Asurim. So just for a tangent, I mentioned that there was another nusach. The Rokeach had this, the Aguda had it, the Bahag had it, the Rav Nachronai Gaon had it, the Rav Amram Gaon had it. Many of the Rishonim had this girsa of Baruch Magbia Shefalim, that blessed is he who raises up those who are downtrodden. And this is not the only nusach which was lost. For example, we have a whole bunch of others. I didn't put this in the, but from the Geniza, from Rome, from Romania, and from France, we have a series of brachot which were lost. We have Magbiah Shvalim, Meoreri Shenim, Mekitz Dumim, Maftiach Shemea Charashim, Marnin Ilimim, Somech Noflim, and we also saw one example of Baruch Rofei Cholim. So a lot of different versions, both in the Geniza, the Italian version, the Greek version, the French version, even the German version, had extra brachot, which probably weren't even in the Talmud, but a lot of these versions had extra brachot in the morning that a person would say. All of these, of course, are borrowed from languages in scriptures, are borrowed from languages in Tanakh, but a lot of these are lost girsaot. And unfortunately, the one of Magbiah Shefalim, I don't really know why this one went extinct. So many of the early ones, so many of the early Talmuds, and so many of the early Rishonim had Magbiah Shvalim. So I'm really at a loss as to why Magbiah Shvalim was lost to history. My assumption is that the later copies of Talmud didn't have it, and for some reason it just got left out, and therefore it got omitted from the Sidurim as well. That's my suspicion. I know there's an article about it in Moshe Chalamish's book on Kabbalah in Tefillah, but I didn't have a chance to see it in time for the shiur. If I do get to see it later, I will follow up. Okay, so we did Matir Asurim. What's the next one in the Gemara? Kilavish, when a person gets dressed, Lema Baruch Malbish Arumim. A person should say, blessed is he who gives us clothing. This one's pretty simple. Of course, the Mekubalim go deeper into that, and they say that this has to do with the what is this called? The Ar Hamakif that surrounds a person when he wakes up in the morning, which is a beautiful idea. And there's also a fascinating Shulchan Aruch. I think it's in Tuf Reish Yud Gim Tuf Reish. I want to pull this up for you. Malbish Arumim. Hold up. This is worthwhile to wait 20 seconds to pull up, I promise. The Shulchan Aruch essentially says that when you get a new piece of clothing, right? If a person gets a new piece of clothing, he should, I'm going to get you the language. Bishat hakinyan shel beged bishat hakinyan yesh lo levarech af al pi she'adayin lo nishtamesh behem. Right? So the Shulchan Aruch is in, Aruch Chaim Reish Chaf Gimel. I don't know why I thought Taryag. I'm thinking of a different halacha. The Mechaber says that if a person gets a new beged, when he buys it, he should say Shachianu, right? Famous. She'ena bracha ela al yedei simchat halev shu samech b'kinyatan. The bracha is only for the enjoyment that he's so happy that he got a significant new piece of clothing. Ukishi al bishem, the Shulchan Aruch says mevarech malbish arumim. The Shulchan Aruch out of the blue, he invents this. He says in Reish Chaf Gimel that a person, if after you say Shechianu, you should say Baruch Hashem, Malbish Arumim. It's an incredible thing. Now, this does not come from the Bavli, but this is mentioned in the Yushalmi and in Perek Tes in Halacha Gimel. So, and also in a Tosefta. So the Shulchan Aruch paskins like this Yerushalmi and this Tosefta, even though nobody paskin like this before him, as far as I know. Lamaisa, I don't think many people do this today. I don't think many people say Baruch Malbish Arumim after they what's the word? After they get a brand new piece of clothing. But the Berachot also brings the people who get a brand new hat to say Shachianu and also say Oter Yisrael B'Tfara based on this halacha. So I just thought it was really interesting. Okay, a little further. I wish we had more time to go through all of that, but let's go a little further. Kizakif, a person gets upright, he should say Baruch Sokef Kefufim, as we mentioned from the pasuk. It's based on a pasuk. Hinachit la'ara lema Baruch Roka ha'aretz alamayim. This is also based on a pasuk, right? It's to say, blessed is he who spreads the firmament of land on top of the water. The Mekubalim I shouldn't say go crazy here, but the Mekubalim speak about this very deeply because the idea of Rikia is a very important idea in Kabbalah, that there's, I believe it's Or, Rakia, Mayim, Sheleg, there's different stages of firmness to the creation or the existence of matter and the creation and existence of energy in the Kabbalistic thought. And Roka Haaretz Halamayim is a reference to this idea of Roka or Rakia. So it's a very mysterious bracha. It's not clear why we say it at all. So honestly, I'm not unconvinced by the Kabbalistic interpretations of it, simply because otherwise, why would, even if you say somebody invented this for the sake of inventing it, and we're going to get to the reasons later, like if somebody, why would they choose this language from the Pesach? I think this is a pasuk in Yeshaya. Like, why would you choose that language for putting your feet on the ground? I'm not, or like, why would you think of making a bracha for that to begin with? So I'm not unconvinced by the Kabbalistic interpretations of this, that there is something much deeper going on. And I discussed it at length in one of the previous shurim about all those stages of evolution of energy and in the Kabbalistic thought. So I beg you to reference back to there. Let's go a little further in the Gemara. Himasgif, when a person walks, Lema brucha mechin misadei gaver, right? He should also say a mechin misadei gaver, which is based on the pasuk, which is me'ashem misadei gaver konanu, right? When a person walks, he should say that bracha. A little further, kisayim misane, when he puts on his shoes, Lema brucha sali kol tzarki. He should say thank you Hashem for giving me all of my needs. That a person should thank Hashem for providing all of his needs. And the Sfarim, the Pirushim explain why do your shoes represent all of your needs? Why is it that when I put on my shoes, I say, God has done all my needs? So they say, well, there's we know there's Chai, Medaber, Tzomeach, and Medaber, Chai, Tzomeach, and what's the last one? Anybody remember what's the word for the last? Domem. Thank you. Right. So they say that when you put on your shoes, you're a living person, and you're a medaber, and your feet are inside a shoe made of leather, which is a cow. So you're standing on top of an animal. So chai is on top. So medaber is on top of chai, and then your shoes are on top of the grass, which is someach, and under the grass is the earth, which is domem. So that's why it represents kol tzorki. That's why the shoes represent kol tzorki. That's what the Mefarshim say. I'm just going to point this out. Of all the homiletics we did, Rav Schwab here says something beautiful. He says that, and I've always remembered this. I thought this is such an important klal for life. Rav Schwab says that this is the only bracha which is written in the Shleasani Goyes. This is the only series of the Brachot HaPeulot which is in the personal. It says Shesali. The other ones are just plain, right? They say pokeach ivrim, right? They say it in the plain third person sense. But this is shasal li kol tzorki, not shasal lanu. So Schwab says something so cute. He says that when it comes to your needs, when it comes to what you have in life, whether you have enough money, you have enough food, whether you have enough resources, friends, family, connections, when it comes to what you need, you have to be grateful to Hashem as if God has given you everything you need, but only you. Never should you have this attitude about other people. Never think that other people have everything they need. You should always consider that other people don't have what they need, and don't say, you know what, Hashem will provide for them. No, Hashem will give them what they need. No, you give them what you need. You give them what they need. Never assume that other people have what they need or that Hashem's going to fulfill it for them. Only imagine the frame of mind you have to have is that Hashem provided you with everything you need. Everybody else needs help. So I love that idea of loving kindness, that's the attitude a person should have towards other people, to be very other focused and other oriented. I really like that. That really stuck with me, even though the first time I saw it was like 6 years ago. All right, further. When he girdles his belt, he should say Baruch Ozer Yisrael b'gvura, right? Who girds Yisrael with gvura. And Kipari Sudra al Reishen, when he puts a hat on his head, he should say Baruch Oter Yisrael b'tifara. Blessed is he who crowns Yisrael with glory. So those are beautiful brachot. The Rishonim, even Rabbi Yehuda ben Yakar says there's a deeper meaning here, because there's an idea of Ote Orka Salama. There's an idea that Hashem crowns. I should say no, not Ote Orka Salama. There's another pasuk. There's a pasuk V'chiyitat Ateret Tiferet Biad Hashem, pasuk from Yeshaya. There's an idea that we are Hashem's crown. So Rav Yehuda ben Yakar says that Oter Yisrael b'Tifara means that we, Yisrael, are the crown of Hashem in glory. So in many places, first of all, the pasuk Ozer Yisrael B'Gvura comes from the pasuk of Nezar B'Gvura and Tilim Samachay. The grammar of Ozer Yisrael B'Gvura, according to Yehuda ben Yakar, means that Hashem's girding himself with the Gvura of Klal Yisrael, which is again, sorry. Yeah, I think that's what he says by the grammar there as well. I'll take that back because I have to go look at it. All right, and then there's Oter Yisrael B'Tifara. There was an earlier nusach of Oter with a hey. I should point that out. They didn't say Oter, but they said Oter with a hey, like Oter or kasalema. Our minhag is just like the pasuk says Ater Tiferet Biyad Hashem. We say Oter. Rav Sadia Gaon says something very important here. He has a different nusach. His is Otef Yisrael Bitifara. He says if a person is putting on a garment which has tzitzit, then he says like the next bracha lehitatef b'tzitzit. But if a person is putting on a garment without tzitzit, then he says otef Yisrael b'tifara. Fascinating idea, and he has a completely different interpretation of the Gemara as we have it. So that's Rav Sadia Gaon there. Okay, let's finally get back to why do we say these brachot. So the Geonim seem to assume that the Geonim seem to assume that the purpose for all of these brachot is to fulfill the Mea Brachot Kol Yom. We know that we saw the Gemara on Daf Mem Gimel Amud Bet in Menachot. I'm sorry I didn't pull it up in time for I didn't pull it up in time for the slide. But the Geonim seem to assume that the purpose of all these brachot, all these brachot that we just saw on the daf, the whole purpose of them is because we need to have 100 brachot every day. Very nice. But the problem is with this assumption is that the Gemara never makes any mention of that. The Gemara is in the middle of a discussion about when you enter a city, when you leave a city, when you enter a doctor, you leave a doctor, you enter the bathhouse, you leave the bathhouse, you enter a bathroom, you leave a bathroom, you wake up, you go to sleep. So all those, you go into this, you come out of that. So you go into there, you come out of there. That's the focus of the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't mention anything about Mea Brachos when it continues on this tangent. So the fact that the Geonim assume that all of these brachot had a purpose in Mea Brachot B'Kol Yom means that they must have had some sort of misorah. They must have had some sort of tradition to assume this or to state this with such certainty. And I don't have another reason why the Geonim might say this reason. They also bring a midrash that we looked at in the tour. This is a lost midrash with David HaMelech, where David HaMelech was, there was a plague in his time and 100 people were dying every day. And they didn't know what it was for. And David HaMelech, who was the Navi, went to the Sanhedrin. We saw this 2 or 3 shurim ago. And he went to the Sanhedrin and he explained to them that there's a system of bracha that comes down to the world, and you need to say 100 brachot every day. And once we start saying 100 brachot every day, this plague will stop. And kachava. This is what the Geonim bring. So it must be they had an established tradition, not just with the reason, but also with a story. Those two things went linked together. So there's this ancient tradition from the Geonim that the reason we say Mea Brachot every day, and the reason these brachot were instituted was just to fill the quota, which almost is a very strange thing to say, because what you end up saying is that these are brachot for the sake of brachot. Yes, they are brachot hashvach, but they're completely arbitrary. You look around the house, I see a pen. Oh, I put my feet on the like everybody decided in the time of the Amoraim to invent brachot in their time arbitrarily. We don't have any evidence of these brachot existing in the time of the Tanaim. But besides Shlos Ani Goy, Shlos Ani Aved, those are again, I said I would discuss those separately. But these brachot, we don't have any evidence of them existing in the time of the Tanaim. So it's a very strange thing to imagine a period in the time of the Amoraim where people were inventing these brachot arbitrarily. Now, of course, it's important if that's the case, that they were invented arbitrarily, even if they were invented by sages. What's important to note is that this might have been the Nusach in Bavel, but the Gemara in Yerushalmi doesn't mention any of these. We don't have a zecher of these brachot in the Talmud Yerushalmi whatsoever. It's almost like either didn't see it fit to mention, or they just didn't have them in Hag at all. And the same is true for the manuscripts in the Karo Geniza. The vast majority of the manuscripts in the Karo Geniza do not contain the Brachot HaPeulot. None of these, not Hanoten Sachvi Vina, not Pukeach Ivrim, none of them. It's curiously missing. So you could say either because, just like the Yerushalmi, they didn't say them. That's one theory you could push forward. The other theory you could say is, well, these are private blessings and everybody knew them, so nobody saw it fit to write them down. And what I'm showing you here on my screen is one of the notable exceptions from the Geniza, which is, we've mentioned before, a scholar named Dahlia Marks, who did a lot of work on the Berachot HaShachar. And she published this book, Be'et Ishan Ve'a'ira, on the Berachot HaShachar. And she dug up many of the Geniza documents to look through, to compare all of them and how the blessing of Berachot HaShachar were done in the Ben Ezra synagogue in Cairo, in Fayum, in Old Cairo, in Fayum, in Egypt. So she does point out that there are exceptions. There are a couple of manuscripts there which do have the Nusach HaBavli. Some of them have Nusach HaBavli, some of the manuscripts have Nusach HaYerushalmi, and some are a blend. This is one of the very interesting manuscripts that I'm showing you here. The bottom, the call number is Taylor Schechter, NS, I forgot who that is. Nath, I don't remember who NS is. 110.42 FGP code, blah, blah, blah. This manuscript here is a very interesting blend of all of them. If you could just look here, this does have the series, even though it's in Ben Ezra synagogue and they followed the Nusach Yerushalmi. You see Malbish Ramim, Amechin Misade Gaver, Rokar Arts Almayim, Shasita Li Kol Tsarki, which is interesting because a lot of the early versions has Shalochisar Mitzarchi Klum. Ozer Yisrael B'Gvura, Oter Yisrael B'Tifara, Hanoten, and then later Hanoten Lesech Vivina Lahavchin Ben Yom Uvein Laila. Over here we have Sitani ish velo isha, right? So you see on the next page over there. So, long story short, there are notable exceptions in the Geniza. There are situations where some people did a hybridized version and did have the Nusach HaBavli, but as far as we know, in the period of the Amoraim, it seems that these Berachot HaPeulot are a Babylonian innovation. We don't know this for sure, but it seems to not have spread outside Bavel in the time of the Amoraim, and it was relegated to Bavel, not Yerushalayim. It is possible that they said it in Yerushalayim as well, but we just don't have any evidence to support that. The Cairo Geniza's documents are at the earliest from the 9th century, so it just doesn't really help us. Okay, so I should also give honorable mention to, this is Louis Ginsburg. He's a famous conservative rabbi who wrote a famous book called Legends of the Jews. And he also has a book, really a 4-volume set of a Pirush on the Yerushalmi. He wrote a Pirush on the Yerushalmi, in short. And in his Pirush on the Yerushalmi in Brachas, he has a theory that the longer versions of the bracha that we saw last week, of Hamavir Kevlei Shena and Hamapil Kevlei Shena, right? The versions we saw last week, and we're going to explore more later. He believes that those brachot there are many missing sections to it. It is not impossible, according to his opinion, that the longer brachot of the Yerushalmi originally contained the Berachot HaPeulot in a series. So, for example, it would have been a long bracha that would have said Ruchat Hashem Lakeinu Achalam, Hanoten Esach Vivina, Upokeach Ivrim, Usomech Noflim, Uzokef Kifufim. It could have been that there was a longer bracha which contained everything inside of it. Not impossible, according to his opinion. I just wanted to give that its due mention. Okay. But as we have learned, there is always the most important question to discovering really the source of a bracha. Well, not really the source, but the reasons for a bracha. In my opinion, the best way to analyze the true reasons for why we say a blessing is not to ask why we say a blessing, but what were the motivations for these blessings. So one of the primary motivations we already saw. We had an ancient tradition that comes from the Geonim, that they have an ancient tradition that the motivation for these blessings is to fulfill the Mea Brachot. That's the first one. Okay, but as I said, it's very strange because that's arbitrary. And if that's arbitrary, why would they choose certain activities over other activities? So this is a really open door for interpretation. Some would say that, no, it's, this is all Al Pia Kabbalah, and these are all the processes of a person waking in the morning al pi Kabbalah. That's one route to go. It's a very interesting route, but that's one route. For example, I remember when we spoke about this, we spoke about how for example, they say the Malach Gavriel is compared to Sechvi, and there's a whole cycle at night the Zohar brings about 7 times at night that Gavriel calls out. Very interesting stuff. Anyway, some would take the Kabbalistic view. Now, because Professor Marks went through all of this work, I feel like I have some Akar Sataiv, and she did publish a piece on her beliefs as to why these brachot were chosen. So I will do honorable mention. This was done in the Hebrew Union College Annual. If anybody knows, that's the conservative university. They have their own. They have a periodical. So she published a piece on the morning ritual in the Talmud and her beliefs. There's a lot of valuable research here in this article as well. Unfortunately, I'm not sure why there's a lot of miscitings in the footnotes. There's everything's 1 page off, 10 pages off, drove me crazy. But perhaps it's just a translation problem. Regardless, in this piece, she tries to associate all of the blessings, the morning blessings, with these ideas from Victor Turner, an anthropologist, of transition and liminality. So there's this famous anthropological idea that when people are going through liminal states, this is a time of crisis, and they need structure, they need ritual. That's the idea. So essentially, I know this is a little bit hard to explain, but let's say you have a person is unmarried, right? Person's unmarried, and then he's going to get married. Or a person is a chief and he's going to become a captain. So in every culture, in every religion, there's the prior state of structure, right? You're a chief. And then there's the after state, which is when there's a prior state when you're a captain, and there's the after state when you become a chief. So in middle, right, there's a whole ceremony. They take off your clothes of being a captain, and then you have no clothes on or whatever, you have less clothes on, and then they put on your clothing of being a chief, right? So there's this middle stage where you're neither chief nor captain. That stage is called the liminal stage. It's you're neither here nor there. And humans don't like liminal stages. They don't like a chassan on the day of his marriage. That's spooky. He's not married. He's married, but he's not married. He's in that liminal stage. So there's all sorts of rituals. You wear this, you wear that. And we give all sorts of, structures and rituals to guide you through those stages. That's why every culture and religion has its rituals through transitional stages, because humans are spooked by liminality, and they need ritual or structure. She tries to apply this to Berchis HaShachar, and she says that when a person goes to sleep at night, this is before he's going into sleep. Sleep is liminality, and waking up is the new day. So a person goes from being alive to being dead to being alive. And for this reason, there's a whole structure of brachos, and there's a whole structure of appreciation for every single order and every single bracha that comes to mind, because a person is trying to give fixity to his identity. He's trying to wake up, and this is kind of like anthropologically trying to dissect how a person works in the morning subconsciously, that a person has this crisis. He has an existential crisis. He wakes up in the morning. I'm alive again. Who am I? What am I? And all these brachos are reflected in who am I? What do I see? Where am I? Who am I? All of those things. I don't see it. Personally, I think it's a huge stretch to take all these anthropological ideas and kind of force it onto the reading of the Gemara. I don't see it. It is interesting. It's an interesting idea. Personally, I don't see it. I believe my personal belief is that most of these brachos are shvach that people relate to. Put simply, most of these brachos are simply the most popular ones. Essentially, when they were being created, the brachos that resonated with people most are the ones that survived, whichever ones were most motivating to people, whether it was Po'okei Achivrim for opening the eyes in the morning, or Matir Asurim for being able to get out of bed, or Zokef Kifufim. I believe that these languages just happen to be the most resonant, and for some unknowable reason, the most resonant ones, the most appealing ones, were the ones that survived the test of time. Perhaps, for some reason, the other ones like Somech Noflim and Magbiah Shvalim, or as we saw, what was it, Marnin Lemim, like all these other ones just might have not resonated with as many people in as many places in as many times. So I don't really buy the whole anthropological solution here, although I do understand the value of trying to study it that way, because otherwise you're making brachas for the sake of brachas. Why choose these things? There's 1,000 psukim in the Torah. You could say Reifei Chaylim, you could say Seimech Neiflim, you could say 1,000 different, like, why these? And why did these survive? I understand that it's a troubling question, but I don't think that liminality and Victor Turner's theories are the answer. That's my personal opinion. If anybody wants to dive into that and look for themselves, go ahead. Now, I should okay, we'll skip that because I forgot to mention this, but okay, I'll mention it just because we're mentioning it, because I said it. But I forgot to say that Oteri Sabit Faras, some people during the time of the Rishonim, some people had the minhag not to say it because they didn't wear a hat. I just for some reason that sparked in my brain. I forgot to tell you that. But Abu Durham mentions this, that not everybody wears a hat. They don't say Oteri Sabit Farah. Okay, they didn't have a kippah back then. It's a new thing. Surprise, surprise. Alrighty. Now the next thing I wanted to mention was just a funny just on that topic of enthusiasm. This is the Chief Rabbi Belial Bakshi Doron, Zecher Tzadik V'Kadosh L'Bracha. He has a teshuvah, not a teshuvah really, like an essay there's a kuntris called Mililot. I don't know how many years it ran for, but it was like a kuntris of Rabbanim in Eretz Yisrael, Rabbanei Yishuv. And he published in there a piece on Birchot HaShachar. And he says that when in 1976, when the survivors of the Entebbe hijacking were rescued, people who got off the plane said, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam matir asurim. And so in his tshuva there, he says, well, perhaps based on the Shulchan Aruch that we mentioned by Malbish Arumim, perhaps it's possible that people can say, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam matir asurim. It's like at first I thought, I'm like, no, these people are just, they're overly excited. You know, okay, they just they were released from let's like Pidyon Shivuim. They were released from captivity. Now they were released, and they're so excited that they sang out Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam matir asurim. There's just Amei Haaretz. He's like, but now that I'm looking at the sugya, he says, it's possible that this bracha it is halachically okay to do it. He doesn't come out that recommending it, but he does say that it could be that this bracha is like so resonant with people that when they felt this immediate unspeakable joy, they just said Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam matir asurim, and it wouldn't be a bracha levatala. He doesn't want to say that it's a bracha levatala. So I thought that was really interesting. How, like, first of all, how he's sticking up for people who are not otherwise scholars, and second of all, how there are brachot that somehow do resonate with people, and there are brachot that do, became a part of the vocabulary. All of these series of brachot that we mentioned tonight, that are part of the daily tefillah. Almost every Jew who's opened the Siddur knows these brachot by heart. So, they become a part of our vocabulary. And when an incident like that happens, even the Amei Haaretz, even the people who were not learned, not religious, for them saying, it was just natural for them to say Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam matir asurim. So I thought that was really fun, really interesting. So that's so much for the Brachot HaPeulot. I'm sorry if we didn't go deeper into the homiletics. I really wanted to. There's more halacha we could look at. Again, anybody who's interested, look at Reish Chaf Gimel in the Shulchan Aruch and all the achronim there about whether or not you could say these brachot if you want to, even if it's not during the morning, even if it's not part of your fixed liturgy, just like the Rambam used to do it. So thank you everybody for your time and your attention, and I will now pause the record. Okay, so Avner just asked what the difference is between lehavin and lehavchin. When lehavin so there are two early gersaot to this. There's two early versions. One is lehavin bein yom uvein laila, and one is lehavchin. So lehavin bein yom uvein laila, this nusach is preferred by those who want to follow the language of the pasuk exactly, right? And so because we're talking about bina, right, that the sechvi, the rooster, has bina, so we say lehavin. And again, if you're kabbalistically minded, also there is an aspect here of bina with Gavriel. That's first of all. Lehavchin, to distinguish between day and night, The Rabbi Yehuda ben Yakar says something is very funny. He says, "What does the rooster care if it's day or night? He doesn't need it." He basically says, like, lehavchin means grammatically. He says, if you pay attention to the grammar, lehavchin bein yom uvein laila is to discern for others, meaning not that he's distinguishing for himself. He's helping others distinguish. That's the grammar. I don't know how to say that in fancy grammar language, but lehavchin bein yom uvein laila is that a person is distinguishing for other people.
Causative. It's called causative.
Okay, so this causative verb or whatever is of the bracha is that the rooster is helping us know day or night, because as the Yehuda ben Yakar says, what does the rooster care? The rooster doesn't care if it's day or night. From his perspective, it doesn't help him. We're not giving a shvach to Hashem that the rooster knows whether it's day or night. We don't care about the rooster. We care about us. So we're thanking Hashem that Hashem made us a rooster. I forgot we didn't speak about also Hanoten Le'ev Koach, because it's not in the Gemara. Hanoten Le'ev Koach first appears in the Machzor Vitry, which is in France in the 12th century, 11th century, I should say. And it's later we find it in the Smag. It's based on the Pasuk in Yeshaya, Mem Chavtet. The Torah brings it from the Ashkenazi Sidurim. The Temanim today don't say it because the Bavli doesn't have it. The Machaber says not to say it. The Shulchan Aruch, in Shulchan Aruch, paskins not to say it. And he paskins, it seems like he's paskining like the Rush, that some are shvach and some aren't shvach, but he seems to say, the Machaber seems to say that we don't say Hanoten Le'ev Koach because it's not in the Gemara. However, the Arizal in Shara Kavanot endorsed it. The Arizal only gave Rav Chaim Vital two sets of kavanot. He gave him a set of kavanot for Malbisha Rumim, right, for this whole or Hamakif thing, that a person should have kavanah when he says Malbisha Rumim, and he gave him kavanot for Hanoten Le'ev Koach. And therefore, the Mekubalim were adamant that a person has to say Hanoten Le'ev Koach because the Arizal endorsed it. Therefore, a lot of Mekubalim, the circle discipleship of the Arizal, endorsed Hanoten Le'ev Koach, even because it's from the Ashkenaz Sidurim. Even though it does not appear in Bavli, they said you have to say it. The word on the street was that the Machaber, when Rabbi Yosef Karo heard that the Arizal endorsed Hanoten Le'ev Koach, he was chozer, and he said that you could say Hanoten Le'ev Koach, and therefore, the halacha is, at least Chacham Ovadia paskins, Chacham Ovadia says that we can and should say Hanoten Le'ev Koach, and that's why, of course, so many Sfaradi Sidurim today say it, but that wasn't originally the case. As if you look at my spreadsheet, you'll notice a tremendous amount of early Sidurim did not have Hanoten Le'ev Koach. Many more people had Magbiya Shvalim than had Hanoten Le'ev Koach.